I'm going to do is combine my flour, my sugar, and my salt into a bowl of a stand mixer. I'm going to actually sift that to make the flour mixture a little bit lighter so it's not so heavy. We definitely want to get the light flaky layers in our recipe. Okay, so as you can see, I now have my flour in my bowl of my stand mixer, and it is my flour, my sugar, my salt all combined and sifted. I'm going to add my yeast and milk to this mixture, and then I'm going to fit it to my mixer and mix for 10 minutes. Okay, so here's my dough after having kneaded it in the stand mixer for 10 minutes. We are going to actually take it off the hook, move it out of this bowl, and put it into a floured bowl such as this. We're going to cover it and let it stand for 1 hour as the yeast develops and proofs. And once again, when you're working with yeast, realize that you cannot let your liquid get over 138 degrees because yeast does die at 138 degrees. And here's my dough all covered. I'm going to set it aside for 1 hour to let it double in size and ferment. In the meantime, we are going to work with making our butter block that goes inside the dough. Blocking butter in a laminated dough is what creates the flaky, buttery layers that are significant in having a croissant or a Danish dough. Half of a recipe. So I have my 12 ounces of butter. I've let it set out to become somewhat soft so that it's pliable, but not totally room temperature. What we're going to do is prepare our butter to make a roll-in fat in our dough. Once again, the roll-in fat process is what makes croissants and Danish doughs and puff pastries have that nice buttery layers of dough and fat in it. So right now I'm just cutting my butter in half, and I'm going to make a rectangle that eventually we're going to fold into the dough. It's important to keep it in a rectangle shape later on because it just helps to seal the fat in with our dough. So I'm going to start out by, making a rectangle like this to bring it all together. I'm working on just regular parchment paper. You could also use wax paper as well. So I'm going to take a second piece of parchment paper. I'm going to place it over the butter, and then I'm going to roll the butter out into a square a rectangle to maintain that rectangle so that I can lock it in my dough later. Okay, so I'm just going to take my rolling pin and I'm going to mash the butter together. I'm just trying to make it become one cohesive piece of butter, and you just keep moving it back and forth, and your butter starts becoming one solid piece as it molds and blends together. So as you can see with my butter as I'm working with it, it of course does not make a completely rectangle shape. So I can use just a normal bench scraper and come in and press against the edges like so, and I start getting a more rectangle uniform shape. Once again, I'm just reshaping the butter because I will want it to be in a rectangle form later on when I lock it into my dough. So you can see what it looks like. That's what it is. I'm now going to place this in the refrigerator with both my pieces of parchment paper on it. And we want to chill the butter back up so that it becomes somewhat more firm than what it is right now. So while my dough is proofing for the hour, my butter can be in the fridge getting cold so that when we lock it in, it doesn't squish out the sides of the dough. So here we are an hour later, and as you can tell, the dough has doubled in size, and we're going to get ready to roll it out, and we're going to lock in the butter. The first thing that you're going to want to do is lightly dust your work area with flour. You certainly don't want your dough that you work so hard on making to stick to your table and not process correctly. So just give it a fine dusting on top. and then you're going to add your dough to the floured surface area. We're going to begin rolling our dough. I'm going to kind of just turn it over a little bit, make sure that it's dusted really well. The key to rolling out a dough is you want to go in one direction. What you don't want to do is this. That makes your dough tough. So just keep turning your dough to make sure it's not sticking and go one way. And so we'll continue this. We're trying to make our dough into the shape of a rectangle so that it can pair up with our butter and become locked in a rectangle shape. As you can see, I'm going to manipulate the dough somewhat to try to mimic a rectangle before I get too far into rolling out the dough. It's just going to help me to maintain that rectangle shape. My dough is in a rectangular shape, and now I'm going to get out my butter, lay my butter rectangle on top of the dough. So here I have my butter. It's in a rectangular block. I'm going to peel off the parchment paper. And you can see it solidified together real nice and became its own block. And I'm going to lay it on my dough. I rolled my dough out to about twice the size of the butter. We want to make sure that we have plenty of room to fully lock the butter into place and enclose it. When I say lock the butter, I mean totally enclose it in the dough. So I'm going to lay it about halfway to, I don't know, a third of the way in the dough. I'm going to take one end of my dough, bring it over, and totally enclose that butter. I'm going to take my rolling pin. I'm going to move it down so you can see it better, like that. I'm going to take my rolling pin. I'm just going to seal the areas around the butter, like so. Just making sure that we get a good seal so that when I go to roll out my dough, my butter doesn't squish out of the sides of my dough. Now that I've locked my butter in my dough, I'm going to take a pastry brush and just kind of remove some of the excess flour on the outside. Excess flour can also make your dough tough. So when you're dusting your surface, you want to make sure that you don't use too much flour. You don't want your dough to become dry and unflaky at the end. So I'm just going to use my pastry brush, like I said, to slightly brush it. So now that I have my butter locked in, I'm merely going to start rolling out the dough. I want it to be about a half an inch to a quarter of an inch depth once I'm done rolling my dough. What we're going to do is perform what they call a book fold. That's basically taking your butter, sealing it in your dough, rolling it out, and then we're going to fold our dough. And it's actually going to look like a book when we're done folding. Once again, you want to try to maintain a rectangular shape with your dough as much as possible. You want to work fairly quickly because you don't want your butter melting and seeping out the edges. So I'm just going to keep turning it and rolling out my dough. Now that I have rolled out my dough, I'm going to turn my dough and I'm going to perform book folds on my dough. So I'm going to actually fold it over once, kind of pat it down, seal it. Once again, you want to try to maintain a rectangular fold on this. I'm going to fold it like so. I'm going to take my rolling pin and go over it slightly. We want to seal in the dough that we just wrapped. When you're rolling it out, you want to make sure that you don't press so hard that you're tearing your dough. You want your butter to stay as encased in your dough as possible. And once again, we're still maintaining a long rectangular shape to our dough. What we're going to do now is place this in saran wrap or plastic film, and we're going to let it set in the refrigerator for an hour. We want the butter and the dough to become the same temperature and harden up somewhat, firm up, so that we can roll it again and make another book fold. Actually, the next time around, we're going to do what they call a double book fold. So you let this set in the refrigerator about an hour to an hour and a half. We're back. We have allowed our dough to rest in the refrigerator for an hour to an hour and a half. It now is ready to be rolled and booked again. We're going to start by just rolling out the dough. We want to make a rectangular shape once again. We want it probably twice the size it is now for our next book fold. So once again, we're just going to roll the butter, taking care on the edges. We don't want to be so hard that we crack the edges and our butter oozes out. Okay, so we have rolled out our dough and we have it to about twice the size where we had it before. So we are going to take the time to do another book fold. So we're going to roll our dough to about a third of the length. We're going to take our pastry brush and just be sure and wipe off the excess flour that we have in here. And then we're going to take the other third and fold it over the first third that you made, making a book. Once again, it's in a rectangular shape. We're going to take our pastry brush and remove the excess flour off of it. So in the second turn of laminated dough, oftentimes you'll want to do what they call a double book fold. That simply means that you're going to fold it like this. After you've rolled it out, I'm going to then roll it once again to about twice the size and do another book fold. In that second book fold, instead of going 1/3 and 1/3, we'll go 2/3, 1/3. We have our dough rolled back out again. We're going to do a double book fold, and as I said before, we're going to do about 2/3, 1/3. I'm actually going to turn my dough to the side here, and we'll go 2/3. It's about 2/3. And 1/3. We're gonna take our rolling pin and kind of seal our dough in, just like that. We're going to, you can see that the dough, the butter is starting to get warm where I've been working with it. It's summertime, so it's a lot hotter than what it normally is. So you're gonna get the butter oozing just a little bit, but you want to get that solidified back up before it oozes all up. So what we're going to do is rewrap this and set it back in our fridge. Once again, because it's summer, I'm going to put it in my refrigerator for about an hour and a half and let it rest. And when we're done, we'll bring it back out. We'll do one more book turn, and then the dough is ready to chill. Roll it back out, cut your croissants that you want out of them, and let it rise. Flour your surface and start with the side that has the seam, and we are going to just merely roll this out to twice its size once again and do our final book turn. Okay, so we have our dough rolled out the final time. I'm going to merely brush it with my pastry brush, and this is a 1/3, 1/3 again. So there's 1/3. Make sure you brush it. Get off the excess flour. And 1/3. Okay, we'll wrap it up in plastic wrap, take it back to the refrigerator, and once again, this is the last fold that we'll do. When you bring it out of the refrigerator the next time after your hour to an hour and a half, you're going to roll it to 1/2 to 1/4 inch thick, and then cut out 4 by 4 squares and roll your croissants.